Hey there, Agile people. Welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast that's put on by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build our software in an agile manner day in and day out. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is kind of perennial. It rises up, it goes down, give it a few weeks, somebody else starts in on it, give it a few weeks, we quit talking about it, and so on and so forth. But it comes up a lot, probably because organizations are always coming into agility for the first time. And whenever that happens, this topic becomes relevant. And what I want to talk about is Scrum versus Agile. Now, the way that's phrased, it might make it sound like I'm saying these two things are at odds, like you can do Scrum or you can be Agile. There are some places where it certainly seems like that was the case, but that's not actually what I mean. What I mean is Scrum the same thing as Agile? What does it mean to say we do Agile or we are Agile? Does it mean you're doing Scrum? And if you're doing Scrum, does it mean you're Agile? Are those terms synonymous? And if not, then what are the differences? You might be sitting over there thinking, oh my gosh, who cares? Like, can't I just look this up in a dictionary and discussion done, right? What's the importance of getting these terms correct? Well, I would offer that there's a pretty big difference, and your ability to distinguish between them is going to make a huge difference in your own experience and the experience of your teams as well. So let's talk about it. A lot of times when I'm out and about in conferences or working with other developers with some of our clients here in town, inevitably someone will say something like, we do Agile or we did Agile on this project, which is always a little bit fascinating to me because Agile is an adjective. It describes something that you do. It's not a noun. So when you say like we do Agile, it's almost like saying, yeah, in our last project, we did fast, or we did smart, or we did totalitarian, or something like that. Like, these are all adjectives. They're not something you do, they're something you are. They're characteristics of nouns, characteristics of projects, and things like that. There is no Agile that you can do. And so I always follow up with, what do you mean when you say that? And it's weird how, because probably of successful marketing, probably because when a lot of people decide they want to increase the agility of their organization, Scrum is the first thing they're introduced to. But for a lot of people, as soon as they hear that word Agile, they automatically equate it with Scrum. Like I tell people, for example, Integrity Inspired is an Agile shop. Notice how I use that word as an adjective, right? We're an Agile shop, and they say, oh, how long are your sprints? I say, well, we don't use sprints. And then they're like, well, what do you mean? I thought you said you were Agile. And in a way, it's almost like the equivalent of when people need a facial tissue. No one ever says, could you pass me a facial tissue? They always say, would you pass me a Kleenex? Because successful marketing has made Kleenex basically synonymous with facial tissue. In some parts of the United States of America, you don't ask for soda or pop or a beverage, you ask for a Coke. And then they ask you what kind of Coke you want, and you say Pepsi. Coke is just synonymous with carbonated beverage in some parts of the United States of America. And that's kind of what's happened with Agile and Scrum. Agile describes a set of things that you value over other things. And this is part of something that's defined in a document called the Agile Manifesto. At least if we're talking about software development, it is. And the Agile Manifesto for software development tells us that we're discovering better ways of writing software, and we do so by valuing certain things over other things. And so being Agile is really more about whether you share those same values and whether they work out in the same ways. The Agile Manifesto also has 12 principles that kind of articulate what these values look like in more concrete terms. So you can read the manifesto, you can read the principles attached, and you can say, yeah, we need to be more like this. Well, now you're in the right ballpark, because now you're talking about being something. We need to be Agile. We need to become Agile. We need to be more Agile today than we were yesterday. Now we're talking. But Agile is not a methodology. Agile is not a framework. Agile is not a set of practices, or at least a specific set of practices. It's a very high level, like you kind of need to think this way, and you need to kind of reorganize the things you're doing to line up with these values and to act in accordance with these principles. It doesn't give you any practices. There's no daily stand-ups in the Agile Manifesto or anything like that. So there is no Agile. Also, sometimes you'll hear people say there's a difference between capital A and lowercase a Agile. No, there isn't. I don't know where that came from either. And, but a lot of times what they mean is, well, Lowercase a Agile is more like the mindset, the principles, the values, things like that. But capital A Agile is a practice. It isn't. Please stop this. There is no lowercase a and capital case A Agile when we are talking about agility. Let's contrast this with Scrum. Scrum is a set of practices. There are other things in there too. Scrum does have values that your team has to have if you're doing Scrum. It has principles that your team has to have if they're doing Scrum, but it also outlines specific things for you to do. It doesn't outline everything that you need to do. There are plenty of aspects of software development that the Scrum Guide does not address, but it has stuff for you to do. Have these events. These events take this long. Have these accountabilities. Here's what these accountabilities do. Have these artifacts. Here's what's in these artifacts. Here are the events that should generate these artifacts. It has lots of stuff for you to do. And it talks about having, the daily Scrum, for example. That's where a lot of people's daily stand-up practices come from. Or it talks about the retrospective or the sprint review, where the practice of regular demos has kind of come from for a lot of organizations. These are all tremendous ideas. They may all be helpful practices. Maybe some of them are helpful for you. Maybe some of them are not. Maybe the whole shebang is great. But that is a set of things for you to do because we are trying to achieve certain outcomes. They are in line with Agile principles. They are in line with Agile values, but they are not that thing. There are plenty of other things you could be doing besides Scrum and still be Agile. You can get Agile stuff without Scrum in the picture anywhere at all. Think about this for a second. Let's say I've got a team of 2 developers, and these 2 developers, they're working together on the same product. And the product owner for this product or the stakeholder, whoever is the voice of the business into this product, let's say they sit 2 desks away. And what these 2 developers do is every day they code on this project. And whenever they have questions, they don't understand something, maybe when they're about to start a new feature, they talk to this product owner person and kind of get their insight. When they're ready to start the next thing, they check with them, is this still the right next thing? Are these priorities still right? And they're coding. And they don't have a daily stand-up because the 2 of them are working together. Why would they take 15 minutes every day to get together and talk about what they were working on or to plan their work for the day in the abstract and then go off and do it? They're planning their work constantly as they go, right? They're always together deciding, what do we need to do next? How are we going to do this? How are we going to split it up? Having a daily stand-up just gets in the way. So they're constantly doing this. As they run into things that they want to improve, they just improve them. Like, hey, it'd be a whole lot better if we did this instead of that. Okay, let's try that for a while and see how it goes. So these 2 people, they are always making these improvements. They're checking, they're getting feedback. Maybe they've got a user and every day they have that user over at their desk saying, does this screen look right to you? Is this how we have? So maybe they don't even have regular demos or their demo is every single day, we might say, right? They are constantly showing, constantly getting feedback, constantly planning their day, constantly making improvements. It's just part of how these 2 people are naturally operating. Are these people Agile? Of course they are. I just described almost one of the most Agile teams that you can have. But there's nothing in there about sprints. There's nothing in there about Scrum Masters. There's nothing in there about having cadenced retrospectives. There's nothing in there about having a sprint goal or any of those things. And that doesn't mean all that stuff is bad. It just means that you can be plenty Agile without any of that stuff at all. Scrum is not synonymous with incremental development. Scrum is not synonymous with getting feedback. Scrum is not synonymous with adjusting feedback. It is a fairly specific way of accomplishing those things. You got to have the time box sprint. If you get rid of that, you're not doing Scrum anymore, for instance. Is the time box sprint useful? Well, in some kinds of work, it is. In some kinds of work, it just gets in the way. So when we're talking about building agility and making an Agile team, it's very important that you don't think of those 2 things as being synonymous. Like we want to be Agile, so now we got to do Scrum. Scrum is a specific, if you will, implementation of the things that you'll read in the Agile Manifesto. There are plenty of other things you could be doing. There's other frameworks to choose from, other methodologies, and even having no particular framework at all, just sort of cobbling together the things that work for you as you go. That's pretty Agile. I mean, you don't get much more Agile than that, right? And so all those things can happen without the framework that Scrum imposes. So this should raise a question in your mind. well, if I don't need to do Scrum to be agile, or I don't need to do Scrum in order to get the benefits of agility, if I could be doing other things or maybe picking and choosing what I want to have and what I don't have, then why would anyone do Scrum at all? I mean, isn't having no set framework that you can dynamically build out better than having a set framework that you have to adhere to for the rest of your life? Well, yes. You sold me. There's really nothing else I can say about that. That's true. But Scrum has a lot of value in certain circumstances, depending on where your team is at and the kind of work that they're doing. For example, you might have a team that has a fairly good sense of agile principles, but they just don't know where to start. They just don't know how to get going. And they're like, it would help if we just saw some kind of concrete form of this, even if it doesn't fit us, even if we know ultimately we are not going to stay with this. But we just kind of need something to kind of help give us ideas, get us going. We can see what we like, see what we don't like, and then we'll be in a good position to figure out what we want our system to look like. Users are this way too. A big part of Agile software development is showing them things that we know it's not the final format. We know they're going to want to change, but they have to see it in order to really make determinations about what they really do and don't want. So Scrum can serve that purpose sometimes in organizations. It's just something you do because you're like, hey, let's have something concrete in front of us. And then, let's give it a good shake, a couple months maybe. And then let's figure out, like, is this really it? Is this the thing? Now that we've seen it, what do we like? What don't we like? Let's build our own thing. But now we have sort of experienced what one might look like. So it could be useful for that. The other place Scrum is useful, and useful for much longer term, I would say, is for those teams who are developing products where the product is unpredictable. As we've talked about in previous podcasts, virtually every software development project has an element of uncertainty to it. It's silly to think with any software project we can fully predict and plan everything that's in it. But some products are a lot more predictable than others. With some products, we might be building them internally for a line of business where the domain is very well known. And yeah, we may include this feature. We might kick out this feature. We may tweak this or that based on the feedback that we get. But we're not radically redefining the product, right? We're not going to decide, hey, we're going to build a pricing API for this organization's applications, and then decide a quarter way through, hey, in response to feedback, this pricing API needs to be a Twitter clone now. That's not what's going to happen. But for teams that are building products that are very murky, very unknown, you might have a goal for the product, like here's a need, we're trying to fill it, we're trying to address it. We have ideas of features that we think will do this, but we're kind of guessing. And so we're going to take that first increment, we're going to build it, we're going to get it out the door. We're going to get it in front of users, in front of our market. We're going to see what they tell us. And on the basis of what they say to us, we're going to kind of take all that and we're going to sit and we're going to replan. Every increment we're going to plan. Every increment we're going to pick out what our backlog is. That's where Scrum becomes very useful. It's when you can only take baby steps in your product because the future is just unclear. You don't know what features are going to be meaningful. You don't know what features are going to be valuable. You have a guess, but you have to let the market tell you or your user base tell you or whatever that is. And on the basis of that feedback you get back, the product itself mutates. It's not just how you code it or maybe the UI of a screen being tweaked in response to feedback. It's the very contents of the product itself mutate because of what you're getting back from the people who need the software. Because you might start out thinking, hey, to get this done, the users are going to need X, Y, and Z. So you build X, you put it in front of the users, and the users are like, we hate X. We don't need this. What we really needed was Q. Are you going to build Q anytime soon? And you're like, crap. Well, we got to build Q. Forget that Y and Z stuff we were talking about. Q's where it's at. Now the product is about Q. That's when Scrum can be really useful because Scrum controls by fiat the amount of time and money you spend on any given step forward. 2 weeks, maybe, is your sprint length. So you build an increment in 2 weeks, you stop, you get your feedback, and then you replan your backlog based on the feedback that you got. In those environments where that is necessary for your product, or it's going to be necessary at least for a certain period of time, Scrum was designed exactly for that. That's exactly what it was for. A lot of software development teams are not in that position. And so that really frees you up. You don't need to control time and cost for a very tiny increment and then see if that increment was successful or not, and then readjust your product contents on the basis of which you hear back. Generally speaking, for a lot of software projects, we kind of know, like, yeah, we may kick out this feature or that feature, but we kind of know, yeah, they're going to need to be able to do this. They're going to need to be able to do that. They're going to be able to do that. And 80% of the product, we kind of have in our heads at a high level. This is probably what's going in there. We might negotiate in bits and pieces on the other one. A lot of software projects look like that. And when they do look like that, Scrum isn't going to give you anything that any other framework probably would bring to you. And even in the situations where Scrum is useful, Scrum is not your only choice. Tameflow uses moves to accomplish a very similar thing. A lot of lean teams will use MVPs to accomplish a very similar thing. So my point is this. The reason I care about people not conflating Scrum with Agile isn't because I'm a big definition nerd and I hate it when people use the wrong definitions for things. That happens to be true, but it's pure coincidence. The reason why it's important is because when your organization is thinking about agility, you need to figure out the best way for you to get there. And it does not have to be Scrum. You have many, many, many other roads up that mountain, but it also might be Scrum. That might be the best thing for you. So I encourage you, if you're trying to start an agile journey in your organization or increase your agility, don't just blindly go out there, grab yourself a Scrum master or a Scrum coach and start doing Scrum because that's what agile means to you. It's not what agile means. You have many, many more choices, and I encourage you to sit down and think and have very deliberate discussions over what the best fit is going to be for your team to increase your agility. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.